Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua. Il maestro delle cerimonie di leggere il messaggio.
On the morning of April 21st, 2025, the world was shaken by the stunning announcement. Pope Francis, leader of the Catholic Church, was dead at the age of 88. As tributes poured in from world leaders and faithful followers alike, one truth became inescapably clear. Something about his death didn't sit right. The Vatican released only a brief statement, citing natural causes, but insiders whispered about a strange sequence of events in the days prior. The Pope had abruptly canceled meetings, retreated from the public eye, and was last seen on camera looking noticeably disoriented. Was it illness or something more? As mourners gathered in St. Peter's Square, speculation began to ripple across the globe. What really happened to Pope Francis in his final hours? In this documentary, we explore his remarkable life, his declining health, and the unsettling mystery surrounding the final days of a pope who many believe knew something he never got the chance to share. Before he became one of the most influential spiritual figures in the modern world, he was simply Jorge Mario Bergoglio, a boy born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, on December 17, 1936, to Italian immigrant parents. Quiet, studious, and deeply spiritual even from a young age, Bergoglio's path to the Vatican was anything but ordinary. He trained as a chemist, danced the tango, and briefly had a girlfriend. But by his early 20s, he felt the pull of the priesthood. He joined the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, vowing to live a life of poverty, obedience, and service. As a Jesuit, Bergoglio wasn't just a scholar. He was a man of the people. He refused to live in the bishop's palace when he became Archbishop of Buenos Aires in 1998, choosing instead a modest apartment where he cooked his own meals and rode public buses. To the powerful, he was a mystery. To the poor, he was a quiet savior. When others stayed behind the walls of the church, Bergoglio walked the slums barefoot. Then, on March 13, 2013, lightning struck, literally and figuratively. Hours before the white smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel, lightning hit the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. Inside, cardinals from around the world had just elected the first Jesuit pope, the first from the Americas, and the first non-European pope in over 1,200 years. When Jorge Mario Bergoglio stepped onto the balcony and took the name Francis, honoring the saint who lived for peace and the poor, he sent a message. The church was about to change, but change would not come easily. Pope Francis entered the papacy at a time of crisis. The Catholic Church was reeling from decades of sexual abuse scandals, dwindling attendance, and growing distrust from the modern world. Where his predecessors had defended tradition, Francis sought to question it. He stripped away the papal grandeur, refused the luxurious papal apartment, and famously said, "Who am I to judge?" Words that would echo across debates on homosexuality, inclusion, and reform. He opened the Vatican's archives on Pope Pius XII and the Holocaust, invited climate scientists to the Holy See, and pushed for interfaith dialogue with Muslims and Jews alike. His encyclicals on climate change and economic inequality drew both praise and backlash. He denounced the excesses of capitalism, calling for a poor church for the poor, and repeatedly warned about the globalization of indifference. But not everyone welcomed his vision. Inside the Vatican, tensions simmered. Traditionalist cardinals openly criticized his views. Whispers of conspiracies began to swirl. Was Francis pushing too far? Too fast? Some even feared a schism. He was attacked for softening church stances, for his open arms toward the LGBTQ+ community, and for confronting deeply rooted financial corruption within the Vatican Bank. He fired officials, launched secret investigations. In 2020, he replaced a powerful cardinal, Angelo Becciu, after a mysterious financial scandal involving London real estate. Behind the scenes, the Vatican was changing, and not everyone liked it. And yet, Pope Francis remained undeterred. His travel schedule was relentless. He visited the Central African Republic amid civil war, prayed at Ground Zero in New York, and walked the ruins of Mosul in Iraq just weeks after ISIS was pushed out. He washed the feet of prisoners and immigrants on Holy Thursday, led climate marches from afar, and advocated for sins and scientific cooperation during the pandemic. He was the people's pope, the pope who listened, who broke protocol, who seemed to radiate empathy wherever he went. But, as the years passed, cracks began to show. By 2022, Pope Francis was frequently seen in a wheelchair. A knee problem was officially cited, but rumors suggested more serious conditions. Recurring lung complications from a surgery he had in his youth, or possibly something neurological. He canceled trips, appeared increasingly frail, and began speaking more frequently about retirement, drawing comparisons to his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, who had famously stepped down in 2013. Yet Francis did not retire. He insisted on serving until the end. In the final months of his life, some noticed subtle changes. He spoke often of death, of accountability, of things still hidden. In private meetings, he alluded to dangers within the church, dark forces that resisted reform. He warned of wolves in sheep's clothing. He said cryptic things like, "The house of God must be cleaned, even if its foundations shake." These statements didn't make headlines, but to those paying attention, it was clear. Pope Francis was not just grappling with age or illness. He was wrestling with something larger, a spiritual battle, perhaps, or maybe a political one. Then, as spring arrived in 2025, the Vatican tightened its circle around the pontiff. Public appearances were cut short. His last Sunday blessing appeared stiff, almost robotic. Cameras caught him struggling to form sentences. Behind him, aides looked nervous. Rumors spread that the Pope was gravely ill, but no official word came. And then, silence. Now, with his sudden death, the world mourns not just a leader, but a man who carried the weight of history, scandal, reform, and faith on his shoulders. A man who many believe knew more than he could safely reveal. Was his death truly peaceful? Or was it the end of a long, quiet struggle not just for his health, but for the soul of the Church itself? This is the story of Pope Francis, a revolutionary figure, a humble man, and a pope whose legacy and final days are anything but simple. For a man often described as the most approachable and active pope in decades, the gradual deterioration of Pope Francis's health was hard to ignore. He had once made headlines for embracing the poor, climbing narrow staircases in the slums of Manila, and walking across refugee camps with ease. But by the early 2000s and 20s, the energetic figure who had seemed to defy his age began to show visible signs of wear. At first, the Vatican chalked it up to minor ailments, a slight limp here, a cancelled event there. Nothing to worry about, they said. But those who watched closely noticed something changing. By 2022, Francis was no longer walking unassisted. He began using a cane during public appearances. Then came the wheelchair. Still, he smiled. Still, he blessed crowds. Still, he gave speeches with the passion of a man on a mission. But off camera, his condition was more serious than the Vatican let on. Pope Francis had undergone colon surgery in July 2021, and while the official word was that he had recovered completely, sources within the Vatican hinted otherwise. The surgery had taken a toll, and there were whispers that complications lingered longer than expected. At the same time, Francis's long-standing respiratory issues, dating back to a severe lung infection in his youth, appeared to be returning. He had only one functioning lung, and now even that was weakening. Despite this, he pushed forward with an exhausting schedule, traveling to Bahrain, Canada, Kazakhstan, and war-ravaged Iraq. It was as if he knew his time was running out and wanted to touch every corner of the earth while he still could. But with each trip, observers noticed the toll it took. He would sometimes slur his words, pause longer than usual, or struggle to stay upright during Mass. In early 2024, concerns intensified. Francis abruptly canceled his trip to Dubai for a major climate summit, citing bronchitis. But the Vatican statement was vague. Some reports claimed it was far more serious, a respiratory failure that nearly required emergency hospitalization. In the following months, more events were dropped from his calendar. He stopped attending certain Wednesday audiences. Even Easter Mass was scaled down. Still, the Vatican remained tight-lipped. They offered no clear explanation for his weakening condition, only general statements about rest and routine checkups. In a church that thrives on tradition and order, uncertainty breeds questions. And behind the Vatican's towering walls, some insiders were beginning to whisper, something was wrong. Then came the strange week. Beginning on April 14, 2025, the Pope canceled 5 straight events without warning. No explanation was given. No video messages were posted. Vatican aides remained stone-faced when pressed by reporters. On April 17th, Pope Francis was briefly seen being wheeled through a corridor inside the Apostolic Palace, head bowed, lips moving silently. Some thought he was praying. Others said he looked lost. His final public appearance came the next day, April 18th. A surprise video released by Vatican media showed him sitting in a dimly lit room, reading a short prayer. But something was off. The lighting was unusual. His skin looked pale. His voice, normally warm and clear, was raspy and emotionless. There were no reporters present, no live audience, just a static shot and a deeply somber tone. It aired once, then disappeared from official channels. Then came silence. From April 19th onward, no new statements, no public sightings, no updates, not even a confirmation that he was alive. The Vatican press office released a single-sentence memo on April 20th. The Holy Father is resting. But behind the scenes, Vatican security was ramping up. Swiss guards were spotted restricting access to the papal quarters. Unmarked medical vehicles were seen coming and going through the back gates of the Vatican. According to one anonymous source, a medical team from outside Italy had been flown in under diplomatic clearance. On the morning of April 21st, 2025, at precisely 7:35 a.m. Vatican time, Cardinal Kevin Farrell stepped forward and made the announcement. With great sorrow, we inform you that His Holiness, Pope Francis, has passed away peacefully in his private residence. He offered no cause of death, no time, no witnesses, just a quiet declaration that shook the Catholic world. But was it peaceful? That's what many began to question. Several irregularities were immediately pointed out. Why was no doctor named? Why was there no official time of death given? Why had the Vatican failed to offer any updates for 3 days prior? And why, in the hours after his passing, were Vatican employees instructed to hand over their mobile phones? Journalists and faithful followers alike began to speculate. Was there a sudden, severe medical event? Did he die in his sleep? Or was he found unresponsive after hours of not being checked on? Some rumors hinted at a fall. Others claimed a collapse during a private mass. One unverified report suggested he had been administered emergency oxygen, but the equipment had arrived too late. Then there were the more dramatic theories. Had someone silenced him? Had he uncovered something, corruption, secrets, threats, that made his continued existence inconvenient? It sounds far-fetched, but history tells us that papal deaths are rarely without shadow. John Paul I, for example, died just 33 days after his election, under circumstances that many still debate. Now, with Francis gone and the Vatican offering only silence, that long tradition of secrecy continues. What we know is this: in his final days, Pope Francis was weaker than anyone admitted, more isolated than the world realized, and possibly carrying burdens that he could no longer share aloud. Whatever happened in those final 72 hours, one thing is certain: the death of Pope Francis was not just the end of a papacy, it was the beginning of a mystery. The Vatican issued a solemn message that would echo across every corner of the globe. With great sorrow, we inform you that His Holiness Pope Francis has passed away peacefully in his private residence. The statement was brief, subdued, and delivered with a calm that felt almost too composed. No specific cause of death was listed. No doctor was quoted. No time of death was provided. For a man known and loved by over 1 billion people, the announcement seemed empty. Cardinal Kevin Farrell, who made the official declaration, offered no follow-up, just silence. And yet, within minutes, the world erupted into mourning and confusion. Global news outlets scrambled to cover the breaking story. Flags were lowered across Catholic institutions. Bells tolled in cathedrals around the world. From Buenos Aires to Boston, crowds began to gather, some in prayer, others simply in disbelief. Social media flooded with memories, tributes, and questions. And from the moment the announcement dropped, a deeper, stranger conversation began to stir in private circles. Why did this feel orchestrated? Why was so little revealed? The timeline of events immediately came under scrutiny. According to unnamed Vatican sources, Pope Francis had not been seen by any outside personnel since April 18th, 3 full days before the announcement. During that time, there were no video addresses, no photos, and no public blessings. In a digital age where transparency is expected, this total blackout set off alarms. Moreover, certain Vatican correspondents who had been stationed in Rome reported a sudden tightening of access to the Apostolic Palace around April 19th. Swiss guards who normally greeted journalists with cordial indifference had grown stern, refusing to answer questions. Entry logs for certain areas had been wiped clean. Even members of the Vatican press corps noted they had been unusually restricted from their daily briefings. The delay in communication, paired with the Vatican's signature air of secrecy, created the perfect storm for suspicion. By midday, world leaders began issuing statements. U.S. President Joe Biden, the second Catholic president in American history, called Pope Francis a beacon of moral clarity in a time of global confusion. France's Emmanuel Macron described him as a bridge between civilizations. Argentine President Javier Milei held a candlelight vigil at the Metropolitan Cathedral in Buenos Aires, saying through tears, "He was our own, a man of Argentina, of the world, of God." Yet even as condolences poured in, the Vatican offered no elaboration. In fact, what happened next only deepened the mystery. The Vatican removed all recent footage of Pope Francis from its official YouTube channel and archives site. The final blessing video from April 18th disappeared. Vatican Radio suddenly stopped its hourly broadcast updates. Even the Pope's official Twitter account, which had previously been updated daily with prayers and reflections, went silent without a farewell post. The entire digital presence of the Pope seemed to vanish, as if someone were intentionally scrubbing his final days from public view. By April 22nd, rumors flooded every corner of the internet. Some claimed the Pope had died days earlier, and the Vatican waited until they could coordinate a response. Others alleged that the Holy Father had collapsed during a confidential meeting with high-ranking officials, possibly after receiving troubling information. An unverified leak suggested that his final hours were not spent in bed, but in the papal chapel, alone, locked inside, and discovered only after he failed to respond to knocks at the door. In a more conspiratorial vein, a former Vatican archivist anonymously told Italian media that the Pope had recently commissioned a sealed report concerning internal corruption, and that the document had been mysteriously misplaced in the days leading up to his death. Of course, none of this could be officially confirmed. The Vatican refused to engage. Spokespersons offered the same refrain: "The Holy Father has returned to the Lord. Let us pray for his soul." For many faithful, that was enough. Crowds surged in St. Peter's Square, holding candles and photographs of Francis. Flowers lined the gates. Pilgrims fell to their knees in prayer. Songs were sung. Rosaries clutched. Confession lines stretched for blocks. People remembered the Pope who had embraced the outcasts, who had said Mass in prisons, who had refused to judge, who had bent every rule to reach the unreachable. But for others, particularly those close to church politics, there was something unmistakably eerie about the entire ordeal. Too clean, too quiet, too conveniently timed. One senior European diplomat, speaking off the record, noted, "When the Vatican says someone has died peacefully, that could mean anything. They've used that language before when things were anything but." Indeed, many recalled the death of Pope John Paul I in 1978, found dead in bed after only 33 days as pontiff, with no autopsy, no clear explanation, and a swirl of theories that remain unresolved to this day. That legacy of mystery seemed to echo now, in 2025, as the Catholic Church once again faced the loss of a reform-minded pope under unclear circumstances. Adding to the tension was the swift preparation for the conclave. Within hours of announcing Pope Francis's death, the College of Cardinals had reportedly already begun coordinating travel. Invitations had been sent, logistics were underway, and yet no funeral date had been finalized, no cause of death, no details about his final hours. The gears of the church were moving, but the soul of the faithful was left in the dark. And perhaps that's what hurts most for those mourning Pope Francis. Not just that he is gone, but that his passing feels like a page torn from a book we never got to finish. A chapter sealed shut before we could read the final words. In a church that preaches light, shadows remain. And behind the walls of the Vatican, one question still haunts the Holy City. Why did Pope Francis truly die? And what don't they want us to know? As the world tried to come to terms with the passing of Pope Francis, a different narrative began to rise from the fringes, one that refused to accept the Vatican's carefully worded version of events. While the official statement claimed he died peacefully in his private residence, there were no medical details, no doctor testimony, no autopsy, and no eyewitness account. Just a quiet, pre-written obituary and silence. And in that silence, questions took root. The Vatican, an institution built on centuries of ritual and secrecy, has long been a magnet for suspicion. But even by its own opaque standards, the circumstances of Pope Francis's death seemed oddly choreographed. The timing was convenient, too convenient. a series of canceled appearances, sudden lockdown of the Apostolic Palace, no digital presence, no press briefings. And then, just like that, he was gone. Some called it divine timing. Others called it something else. In the days following the announcement, reports emerged from Italian journalists suggesting that Pope Francis had been in possession of a sensitive dossier, a file containing detailed accusations of financial corruption, abuse of power, and clandestine political dealings within the Church's highest offices. According to these whispers, the Pope was preparing to declassify the information and release it to a global interfaith consortium, bypassing traditional Vatican channels. That dossier, as far as we know, has never been found. Several Vatican insiders also noted a disturbing pattern in the week before his death. The Pope had abruptly requested private, unscheduled meetings with 3 cardinals, each known for their history of criticizing his reforms. One of them reportedly refused the meeting. Another attended, and later described it only as intensely private. The third has made no public comment since the Pope's death. Were these farewell conversations or confrontations? In the absence of answers, theories multiplied. One narrative suggests the Pope suffered a rapid and catastrophic health event, possibly a heart attack or stroke, but that Vatican authorities delayed the announcement to stage a more graceful exit. That theory raises its own questions. Why delay? What needed to be cleaned, staged, or hidden before the public could know? Another theory, darker still, implies sabotage. Some online forums, citing anonymous leaks and body language analysis from the Pope's final video message, speculated that Francis may have been drugged, silenced, or isolated against his will in the final hours. They point to his slurred speech, his hollow expression, and the fact that the lighting in the video appeared unnatural, almost staged. Others cite eerie details, the sudden absence of his longtime personal physician, the fact that the Vatican pharmacy reported a missing inventory of certain medications in early April, or the abrupt firing of a papal aide just days before his death. Even seasoned Vatican watchers admit there are inconsistencies. Longtime Italian journalist Emilia Vanozzi, who has covered 3 papacies, publicly questioned why the Vatican refused to release the death certificate. For every pope in modern history, she wrote, there has been a chain of medical confirmation, a name, a statement, a cause. Why not now? And then there's the matter of the sealed room. 2 days after his passing, the Pope's personal study was sealed off by the Swiss Guard. Vatican officials claimed it was standard protocol, but staff members say they had never seen a room locked so quickly, so forcefully. Several priests and clerks who worked closely with Francis were told not to return to their offices until further notice. Computers were removed, phones disconnected, surveillance cameras covered. Officially, the Vatican said the Pope's personal effects were being catalogued with respect and care. Unofficially, some believe evidence was being destroyed or hidden. Add to this the rumors of a secret letter, written by Francis in the final weeks of his life, and delivered to an unknown bishop outside Italy. According to leaks, the letter described his fears for the Church's direction, his belief that he had made powerful enemies, and his concern that the institution he loved was slipping beyond redemption. That letter, too, has not surfaced. If it exists, someone is holding it close. Is this all conspiracy? Possibly. The Vatican is no stranger to myth-making, but it's worth remembering. Popes have died under mysterious circumstances before. Pope John Paul I died after just 33 days in office. No autopsy was ever conducted. No medical team ever explained the event. For years, investigators and authors have suggested that his death was connected to a plan to reform the Vatican Bank. an institution long associated with money laundering and political manipulation. Sound familiar? Pope Francis, too, had challenged the financial arm of the Vatican. He shut down shady accounts, fired corrupt officials, exposed decades of embezzlement. He was making enemies, not just in Rome, but around the world. To some, his death was not unexpected. It was inevitable. And yet, there was always something more in Francis, a sense that he knew he was walking a dangerous path, but walked it anyway. In his final homilies, he spoke of betrayal, of loneliness, of a shepherd walking alone into the night. Words that at the time seemed poetic, but now feel ominous. Was he trying to warn us? In the end, we are left with echoes, a brief announcement, a flood of unanswered questions, and a mystery as deep and unsettling as the Roman catacombs themselves. The world lost Pope Francis, but perhaps more chillingly, the truth about how he died may have been buried with him. And until someone dares to dig it up, we may never know what really happened inside the Vatican walls on those final days of April 2025. Thanks for watching this theory.